So I am going to attempt to provide a brief introduction about what this is all about, introducing the actors, a convenience sample of Caribbean fisheries literature and fisheries project profiles in which CRFM was engaged in partnership with the CRFM Secretariat, the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute, Canary, and Caribbean Network of Fisherfolk Organizations, CNFO and Governance and Policy, form the basis of what we're calling a commentary. The results are discussed in terms of the main events and projects over the past 20 years or so that coincide with the period that the CRFM has been in operation, and conclusions are then offered in the context of current and future directions for fisheries governance and policy that should engage both the fisheries organizations of the CNFO and member states of the CRFM in future collaboration with their partners for stewardship. Many of the challenging issues facing small-scale fisheries within CARICOM have concerned governance and policy. Some issues, such as formal regimes for transboundary fisheries management and access agreements, have remained unresolved for decades. Meanwhile, new issues, actors, networks, organizations, and institutions have emerged in the period to increase the complexity of some challenges as well as several possible solutions. Key among the changes from collective action and stewardship perspectives has been the evolution of national, sub-regional, and regional fisherfolk organizations and their expanding roles in fisheries governance and policy in this millennium. The fisherfolk organizations did not make the journey alone, however, and CRFM, that is now celebrating its 20th, played several pivotal roles along with a few of its regional partner organizations. Let's hear it for CRFM. Its partners include the Canary again, CRMES, Center for Resource Management and Environmental Studies at the University of the West Indies, and the Sub-Regional Office of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. The Fisherfolk organization that has developed with and through the partnership to become an important autonomous entity in regional fisheries governance and policy is the Caribbean Network of Fisherfolk Organizations, which is the focus of this presentation. The CNFO, for short, rose to regional prominence, particularly during the development of the SSF guidelines, and has strengthened its status and influence during the guidelines implementation and the creation of a regional protocol for that purpose. This protocol on securing sustainable small-scale fisheries for Caribbean community fisherfolk and societies operationalizes aspects of the CRFM Caribbean Community Common Fisheries Policy. While the evolution and the key actors, especially the CRFM and the CNFO, have previously been separately well documented by Milton Houghton, by Patrick McConney, by Terence Phillips, and others, less attention has been paid to setting out the several projects and the events that aided in bringing them together and changing the regional fisheries narrative towards the more collective notion of stewardship. We, mainly Patrick, contribute to filling this gap. It is also a reminder of the significant Caribbean fisheries scholarship of global relevance produced from applied research within the CRFM region and its focus on the engagement of fisherfolk organizations and stewardship. The publications and the project documents upon which the presentation and its accompanying paper are based were selected from the personal collection of Patrick, and he applied a couple of criteria to selecting them. They included that the sources be previously published, peer-reviewed journals and book chapters. They were preferred, but technical reports were acceptable. The authors should have been Caribbean to the extent possible and drawn from project partnerships. The projects needed to have substantial focus on governance and policy, and there had to be links to fisherfolk organizations that were significant. So these documents represented a convenience sample, and as with any convenience sample, there was no attempt to be random or statistically representative. The result, over 20 publications met the criteria and over 10 very relevant projects were identified to construct the results timeline. There is no attempt either to reveal linear or deterministic relationships between the events and the projects and their outcomes related to fisheries governance and policies. It's really quite difficult to untangle any internal and external influences on any one outcome. So a more organic approach is taken, in which the results form the foundation for a broader discussion. So this is really a very exploratory journey with a touch of advocacy, as we really are looking to argue for further strategic regional collaboration in fisheries governance and policy. So several of the publications reviewed contain detailed text and graphically illustrated timelines and descriptions of how the CRFM and CNFO have evolved along with the projects and the organizational partnerships that reflect collaboration. From these, we distilled only a small sample of the main points that serve to illustrate some of the interplay with fisheries governance and policy along the way towards the SSF guidelines implementation and stewardship. The main aspect of the storyline is the treaty establishing CRFM provided for fisherfolk organizations to be among key fisheries stakeholders. Milton and others chronicled the establishment of the CRFM from its project origin as an output of the CARICOM Fisheries Resource Assessment and Management Program, CFRAMP. It took about 7 years to design the CRFM through a regional participatory process and another year to get the new body operational. Following the conceptual consideration of options, around about 1997, there were in-person interactions with fisheries stakeholders in CARICOM countries, including fisherfolk organizations. And a lot of this included technical workshops and ad hoc working group meetings held between 1999 and 2002 to review, elaborate, and negotiate the detailed arrangements for the CRFM, ending with the preparation of the intergovernmental agreement. This intergovernmental agreement that became the treaty, which established the CRFM, was signed during the international meeting of the CARICOM heads of government, which was held in Belize City in February 2002. Key aspects of our storyline are that the treaty provided for fisherfolk organizations to be among the named stakeholders entitled to become observers of the Caribbean Fisheries Forum, which provides policy advice to the Ministerial Council. Both are components of the CRFM Secretariat's governance structure. In addition, strengthening of fishers organizations and improved community participation was among the 9 priority areas agreed by the countries, apparently without as much contention as some other areas. Compared to the CRFM, more publications examine the early evolution of the CNFO and its recent growing status in regional fisheries governance and policy. Soon after the inauguration of the CRFM Secretariat, staff thought that creative fisherfolk organization networking, resulting in greater adaptive capacity, could make a difference in regional fisheries governance and policy, especially within the concept of fishery co-management. From September 2006, the CRFM Secretariat, I'm sorry, I missed something here. So authors McConney and Phillips write that until recently, despite the treaty provision allowing observer status at the forum, fishing industry groups were unable to directly engage the CRFM's governance system. The organizations lacked capacity at local and national levels and had not yet formed a regional level network organization. So what changed the situation? From September 2006, the CRFM Secretariat led a project on the development of a Caribbean network of fisherfolk organizations that was based on an earlier regional fisherfolk needs assessment and subsequent regional meetings in 2004 and 2005, at which fisherfolk organization representatives recommended forming a regional network of national fisherfolk organizations. The aim was to have institutional capacities of fisherfolk organizations developed at the regional, national, and community levels. The initiative was soon partnered by CIRMES and CANARI. A CNFO coordinating unit was formed in 2007, and the partners contributed additional projects and resources, resulting in a variety of capacity development outputs. The CNFO has participated as an observer at the forum, as well as attended other regional fisheries events as an independent entity. And this continues to the present, but with far less input to CNFO from the other partners, such as CNFO capacity has developed and it became a formal organization under Belizean law in 2016. So subsequent populations on the CNFO go beyond its formation to deal more specifically with fisheries governance and policy interactions within the CRFM region and globally. Processes of the SSF Guidelines Protocol to Caribbean Community Common Fisheries Policy is an example of this. The early years of the Caribbean Community Common Fisheries Policy process coincided with those of the CNFO formation when network capacity was being built. By 2010, however, the CNFO had capacity for policy and governance due to assistance from several partners. The CNFO has been engaged in regional fisheries activities within with the CRFM entities and the Caribbean Community Common Fisheries Policy process. This brings us to linked governance and policy initiatives that have served to unite the CNFO and its members while also forging closer relationships with the CRFM Secretariat, CERMES, CANARI, FAO, and other partners. Many papers examine the engagement of the CNFO with the SSF guidelines and the protocol to the Caribbean Community Common Fisheries Policy that formally incorporated the SFF guidelines into regional fisheries policy. So we've got a timeline of some of the events and the outputs in the process of Fisherfolk organization engagement in regional fisheries governance policy. And what I want to do in this last section is just briefly look at some of the multicultural country fisheries governance and policy Fisherfolk oriented projects that comprise the effort invested over the same period from the start of the millennium to the present. It excludes some projects that were primarily state act oriented and those in which CERMES did not have a substantial role. So early CERMES fisheries governance and policy projects focused on co-management and marine resource governance with some involvement of national or local Fisherfolk organizations, but no regional thrust as the CNFO was not yet in existence. This changed as CERMES partnered with the other organizations to strengthen formal and informal Fisherfolk groups. The Caribbean Community Common Fisheries Policy was not associated with many projects, but the SSF guidelines has been the focus of most since their global adoption. CERMES has attempted to engage the CNFO in most of these projects through subcontracting, consulting, co-designing, and co-implementing activities, serving as a focal point for communication with Fisherfolk. The most recent initiative saw the CNFO playing leading roles, crafting the protocol and the SSF guidelines, promoting the mainstreaming of gender policy in fisheries learning exchanges, forming a leadership institute, and more. The Stewardship Project promoted stewardship by Fisherfolk through policy engagement and influence. The International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture, celebrated last year, saw Fisherfolk paying more attention to the SSF intersectoral interactions and coordination as they aim for post-pandemic recovery and resilience. So an obvious trend is that the CNFO has transitioned from being a recipient of the capacity building efforts to being a net contributor in several instances, such as a leadership institute. So this is just a list of projects, titles mainly, and implementation periods that were extracted from this CERMES database using the criteria that was used for this. In conclusions, considerable sums of money and project funding and associated in-kind contributions have been spent over the last 20 years on engaging Caribbean regional fisheries governance and policy by or with Fisherfolk organizations in the CRFM region. The establishment of the CRFM and then the CNFO set the stage for the regional engagement of Fisherfolk at multiple levels of government. Partnership with CANARI broadened the civil society networking of both the CNFO and CRFM. Partnership with FAO led to the links to the global SSF guidelines development and the implementation processes, and to critical support from the FAO Sub-Regional Office for the Caribbean, especially for projects led by CERMES. So the process of engagement has most recently focused on stewardship and blue economy, including blue and social justice. The recent directions of engagement in governance and policy point to the need to better prepare Fisherfolk organizations for roles in multi-level intersectoral governance. The future of sustainable regional fisheries management and development through collaboration of CRFM, and CNFO with their partners will be challenged by changes in climate, disaster risks, and other global environmental and economic shifts that impact small countries. However, by the end of the next 20 or 30 years, we would expect to see the vision set out in the Caribbean Common Fisheries Policy and SSS guidelines be achieved and institutionalized in the CRFM region through our collective action. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you too, Maria. Wonderful presentation. And I really love steward fish.
Yes.
That was very clever. Let's look towards that future, increased collaboration, and really appreciate the presentation. Do we have any questions or comments? All right, so Lorna Innes, you can go right ahead.
Maria, thank you very much for that presentation. Excellent, and of course it's the basis of my presentation as well. But the question is, in your view, what are the main barriers to excellent coordination in the Caribbean SIDS region. We need coordination because SIDS already have limited capacity. We've heard about this over and over. How can we, but we can also address that capacity gap if we were to coordinate better. What do you, in your opinion, what is the one item that is missing to get to that coordination?
Lorna, that question is just really difficult, very difficult. I don't know if there is one.
I know.
I don't know if there is one. I mean, at this point, I would have to get back to you on that. I definitely would. I don't think that there is any one main thing that needs to be done. I think it needs to be a combination. But I think it's something that we can chat about for sure afterwards, because I really need to think about that one for sure. Sorry.
Thank you.
All right, and that's okay. Not all questions can be answered just off the bat, and some do require more thought and discussion. But thank you so much, Maria.